Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Show to View with Mike G, the show of life, the show of London, the show of travel, White Lyan, Dandelion, and so much more. Today, we're sitting down to talk with Ryan Chetiyawardana, Mr. Lyan, as he's known, in London. I was out in London and Scotland just last week and got to do some great interviews with people, but I've been trying to interview Ryan for some time, doing the show 8+ years now. He and I finally got together talking in this dark but beautiful kind of purple backlit screening room a few floors down at the Sea Containers Hotel there in London. And we talk about life, we talk about art, we talk about the massive body of work that he and his team at the Lyan folks have done over the past 10 years as they're celebrating 10 years of White Lyan, which I got to visit in 2015. So without further ado, I hope you all enjoyed this great chat with Mr. Lyan himself.
It's a good question, and I think we've done a lot of kind of soul searching and exploration of that idea. Like, even when we're looking at trainings with the team, sometimes we're trying to remove the shackles of the past, and we're trying to unlearn and make sure that we're not just kind of, I suppose, hemming ourselves into the formulae, the rigidity of things that have existed, even though, you know, those classical structures are wonderful. Yeah. We're trying to make sure that we're not just biasing ourselves through that process. But sometimes we also go, there's not a need to create something new for the sake of it, particularly if it's not going to connect to people. Uh-huh. The idea of newness is kind of like a lovely kind of conceptual idea, but it's also about going, well, the point of what we create needs to have an end user. It needs to connect with people.
Yes, yes.
So if it's so abstract, if it's so new, then are we running the risk of creating for ourselves? And, you know, we talk a lot about kind of like product-led innovation versus like market-led innovation. And I think we stray between those 2 points of reacting and understanding what's surrounding us, and also then just going, well, actually, can we do this a different way? Yeah. Can we invent a new technique of kind of looking at this in a different manner? And I suppose in one sense, you could be like, as a result of doing that, it's a completely new thing. Right. But it's also about that balancing act of going, why do we want to create something new? What is going to be the purpose of doing it through that kind of like thought process? And ultimately, does it create something meaningful on the other side?
Absolutely.
I think there's certain things that we've done and we've kind of looked to create something, and then we've sense checked ourselves of going, you know what, this is probably a bit too niche, or this is just for us. Right. And that doesn't feel worthwhile.
One's ego.
Yeah.
Because you've been bartending quite some time, and then, of course, quite a different establishments across the world. Where is your ego now? Do you think that when you started, you had a little bit more to prove? In other words, a little bit more you, a little bit less the customer? Not in terms of service, but in terms of the ideas.
I think any point where I was, I suppose, really inserting myself into that kind of situation, I wouldn't describe it as ego, and that's me trying to be as frank and honest as possible. Because it was always about, you know, we talk about wanting to change something or to open up dialogue or to push it into a new direction.
Right.
And that was never about the self. Like, and I think that's again, it was an important sense check, because when you're creating something, there is something nice about expressing yourself and being able to pull something out from you that you've known about or you've felt and you have an attitude to that you want to see out in the world.
Right.
But I think in our early points of work, it's no different to what we're doing now. It hasn't changed that tact. We still want to invite discussion and we want to push our industry forward. I'd say the bits that I do because I need to create them don't really manifest in our work in that way. I think, you know, I went through this kind of like in my head about, you know, as a young artist, do I need to be able to kind of express in this way? Is this going to be my output? And I still do bits of that I do for myself. I still draw and I still do kind of other creative outputs.
That's your medium, is drawing, or did you paint as well?
No, I was drawing. I was never. I did fine art mixed media, so I would try and do bits of sculpture. I'd do bits of kind of etching and kind of even photography, but it was never using that in a traditional way, and it was never. But painting was never one for me. Sorry. But in terms of the work that we do, the aim is never, oh, I need to express this, and this is something I need to get off my chest or bring out to the world. I think that's why I've liked the kind of more collaborative, creative process that we've been doing as a company, and the way that we've looked to do it democratically as a team, have everybody involved and pull all of those different perspectives, because there isn't that need for me to be able to like pull something out for myself. Right,
which is interesting too, is as we get older, we become, you can't any longer be the example. You have to be part of the whole process, right? Because if sometimes you're leading top down, right? Which I hate that happens. But with the team, who I've had the pleasure of meeting, a couple of folks that have been part of the team, what do you think's one common personality characteristic that the team maybe has to have or just does have that encourages this innovation, keeps pushing it forward?
Well, I think we never separate the product from the experience. So I think the care is really important. And I think that stretches in some different ways. So firstly, it's about thinking specifically about the person in front of you. What do you need to connect to them? What is it that they need that they might not even know for themselves that you need to reflect in their experience, or the drink they need to have, or whatever it might be?
Yeah, right.
So that care aspect is really important, but that also extends to, the details that we put in, the kind of, I suppose, the consideration around every little facet of the product that we can hone and kind of focus in on. But it's also the desire to do something different. And I think that's probably been one of the key things that we've kind of encouraged for both a recruitment point of view, but also from a work operational point of view, is going, we want to be able to not just repeat ourselves. We want to be able to encourage them to think outside of their usual way of working and to kind of grow, to have that kind of evolution of their creative outputs. So being able to know that they're going to do something different is kind of important. And that's, there's a sense that can become a little pedantic where you're going, I've got to create for the sake of it. I've got to be new. I've got to do something
You're
different.
talking to exactly the right person. I had to stop making music for a little while because it was becoming compulsive.
Sure.
And creating can be an opioid.
Absolutely.
And
I think there's ways to, I've had this discussion again with lots of friends, particularly from like art school days, of going, is it inherently destructive? Because there is an obsessiveness around it, and you're always chasing that high and those moments. But I think, one of the reasons why I loved the hospitality world of kind of like that as a creative output is actually the high you chase is people's joy. And so you get to see the reaction in it. And like, not that you don't get that in other expressions of art, but it's so immediate in the world of hospitality.
Tactile. Because there's a physical, tangible thing that we can exchange with one another.
Yeah.
And that is one of the last vestiges of culture.
100%.
Right? Because movies, while we're in a screening room, which I would come because I love going to the movies. But most people are like, I'll just put it on my phone. So you take the whole experience out of seeing a cinema.
Yes. Yeah, there's definitely been a movement, well, quite wholesale across the world of exactly that. It's become kind of led by convenience, whereas these tactile things, you can't remove that, because it's until we're getting to the stage where you're absorbing nutrition just from a functional point of view.
Yeah.
But I think there'll be a natural repulsion against those kind of things, because we do need those moments as social creatures. That's really important, and that's the reason why I think it's been very lovely for the people that we kind of attract as team members to have that output of going, right, I'm going to create something weird. I get to express myself in this way and have ownership of it, but I get to connect people to it.
Right.
I get to see the kind of impact of what this work is, and I get to be part of that process as well. I get to bring it to life for them. I get to not make it about myself and an ego. I get to help understand what they need, and then use these various tools that we have in this space to be able to make that work harder and more wonderfully for them.
Yeah, and I love that, because the way in which you talk about people, I think, means you love people.
Yeah.
And that's something that's going away and away and away. So actually, I always consider these interviews like a jazz duo.
Okay.
I'm a shit drummer, but so maybe that's why the pacing will go back and forth, right? But I think about needing that connection with people, this in-person thing. This is why I would never do Zoom. Because I could have like said, hey, let's do a Zoom. No, that's not this. This is different. And I think that there will be an inner core of people that will still buy vinyl.
Yeah.
That will still need to go to bars. They still need to connect like this. But how do you feel about things like AI, which you don't have to get into AI specifically, but how do you feel about technology itself kind of almost eradicating to a degree this interpersonal connection?
Yeah, I think this is a very crucial juncture for that kind of thought. And I think, as somebody who was, in science, parallel to being in arts, I always talked about the fact that science is never inherently evil. There's nothing wrong with it. Like there's going to be, it's always created from a perspective of, you want to be as rigorous and think about this hypothesis as deep as possible. It's the application part of it. So every time that we get a new tool, like there's a little bit of like, and it usually stems from greed of going, how can I use this to manipulate people to get something more for myself?
Right, which is backwards, completely backwards.
Totally.
Yeah.
And, it's often so at odds with what that tool was created for. And, I think there is a beautiful opportunity for all of the new technologies that are coming through to be about enabling more of this sense of togetherness. And I think, everybody came out the pandemic when they were, ripped of that, sense of connection.
Community, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I think it's become very, very important in people's minds. But we've still allowed ourselves, despite kind of being made aware of that more kind of like poignantly than we have done for a very long period of time, to kind of have these bits of technology and these tools kind of turned against us a little bit. And, I think there's a real important part of now of kind of regaining some of those kind of like tools and these different developments and going, actually, this is what they should be for. We should be like stressing and demanding the importance of community and togetherness. Yeah. And all of these things should enable that rather than be to the detriment of it. We should be, and of course it'd be very nice to take a worldview that you could use all these technologies to solve all of life's problems. Sure. I'm not trying to be as idealistic as that, but I do think we need to, change some of the education around some of these things to make sure that we're going, okay, the tool isn't the problem. It's either, we are being lied to or manipulated around certain things around this, and we need to take control of these things back, or we just need to demand more of it. We have the buying power as the public. Yeah. We have the opportunity to shift some of the ways that we view these things. And, there's nothing inherently wrong with the majority of the pieces of technology coming out there. I mean, I don't know how people repurpose, military tech is probably very directed in terms of its application, but the rest of it is all there for us to be able to use.
And to that point, because this is kind of a cute way to an anecdote, but I have this robot vacuum.
Yeah.
Right? Those were created by the military, not the vacuum, but as a technology used to find bombs.
I didn't know that.
That's what they were created for. So it was kind of the opposite. It was created for a thing. We're like, well, let's get a little more lighthearted with this thing. And then you get vacuuming and cleaning your floors. It's
great.
Amazing, right?
I mean, I suppose there's this is again human ingenuity. Is all it takes is somebody to look at something. Cling film was there to treat burns victims, not that.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it was used as a way of having something that would stick to itself and not to your skin. So when you've got burns, you definitely don't want to wrap it and all those things. It was a very complicated thing to treat, and so you ended up with something that was this application. And then somebody went, actually, this is really useful in a lot of other ways. We've overused cling film, so I'm not saying that that's the
but the initial impulse was a good one. Yeah.
Exactly, and I think there's so much opportunity to repurpose what we can use these technologies for,
right?
And to make it, if we put people and joy and togetherness at the center of any circle, you can find ways to use any of these tools to benefit that. And I think we've ended up just doing it slightly different. We've put either money or the technology as being the kind of goal, where actually if we just shift the perception, they can become very meaningful things for people.
And I want to talk about something that's meaningful. My partner, a beautiful woman, she works at Roosevelt Room.
Oh, amazing.
And this is going to come full circle. So she was there at Dead Rabbit and did the pop-up. And so she said, then we went to the Lyaness pop-up.
Yeah.
And there was something, a banana, something that you guys did. She had it with the team over there. And she said, because she's that kind of really detailed artist as well. And all of the details about the bananas, the temperatures, the pieces that you used.
Uh-huh.
The team was so wholly forthcoming about those details. And that you only get there when you are mature enough to realize that you and your team you're the ones that can do it like that.
Oh.
You could give someone those same ingredients, right? And it wouldn't come out the same.
Absolutely. And also that's not something for us to be precious about. You know, I think
Really? I love that.
we love being able to share those things. I think, you know, the thing I've always said is, you know, everybody's situation, perspective, what they're trying to bring into the world is unique. You know, if we can give case examples and it helps people then go, oh, I could do that with this thing I've got, or actually that's a really nice way of thinking about something that I've got that's really abundant and mundane,
right.
and like I can make it feel magical. And you know, that was our thinking, that was the motivation behind going, how do we take bananas, turn it into something extraordinary using very everyday produce?
Right.
I'm happy if people just replicate that banana and they go, you know what, now I've got a great banana ingredient. But also if it's like, oh, cool, now I never thought of doing that. I could do that for my ingredients in this way. You know, that to me is what we should be doing as industries, is sharing. You know, it should be about education. It should be about inspiration. And, you know, the more that we open up that dialogue rather than going, you know, this needs to sit in our little camp. And I think, you know, a lot of people they see things as competition that aren't.
Right.
You know, that doesn't need to be. Like, you know, I think the other side, there's obviously been, particularly in the world of food and drink, a new flood of people that have come into it because it's, you know, it's sexy and cool to be in food and drink at the moment. That they perhaps are kind of trying to cookie cutter stuff they've seen elsewhere and go, you know what, we're not doing this for passion. We're just going to throw this out into the world and we're going to take all the hot trends. But ultimately, I think people see through those things.
I think so too.
So there's no issue about being able to share the information. If somebody wants to be able to just try and rip off and just do a version of all of the hot things they've seen around the world, power to them. But I don't think it's a good strategy for them.
Do you know the word poser?
Yeah.
Is that because I know it's in the States? Do they use that in the UK?
Yeah.
That's what I consider that to be. I almost consider it to be willingly disingenuous.
Sure.
Right? Which to me bothers me to no end. But something that I wanted to commend you on, and what I noticed, and I really definitely want to talk about White Lyan back in the day, right? That I think, being from tech, I think what you've done, and with the team, not maybe single-handedly,
No,
right?
of course.
You have created an incubator. You know what I mean? For ideas.
Yes. I mean, and that's actually, I've never really thought of it in those words, but that's always been the goal, is to set up a framework for allowing people to kind of like come up with ideas and not be boundaried by things and, you know, be able to play. And, you know, I genuinely, the reason why we share so much of that is because, you know, I think that's the way it should be. You should be able to share these ideas, and that, you know, the line I repeat so much across, well, everything is, you know, a rising tide helps all ships.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, it's for the benefit of our industry, of like encouraging more people to think about food and drink in a deeper way, for people to step outside their comfort zone from a public perspective. The more that we can share and educate, the better it is for everyone. So there's no need to hold on to these ideas and be precious about it, because, you know, I think ultimately nobody wants to do that poser approach and just copy. It's not actually very common that that's what people do.
No, you're right. You're right.
I really think most people...
outside of corporate concepts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, albeit, you know, what the corporates, they're never going to change their colors on that.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's much nicer to be able to encourage people. Now, I suppose the way that we try and tell our teams, if they're going, and, you know, we're very lucky to have an amazing network of people in lots of different industries that we call friends and we call on for lots of these different bits of kind of insight, is we never ask people to do our homework for them. So I say to the team, don't go to this leader in this field. So for example, Dr. Ariel Johnson or Dr. Johnny Drain, they're, you know, from the food science world, they've helped us so much with things. I was like, don't call up Johnny or Ariel and be like, how do I grow koji? Because you could go do your own homework and research that. For sure. If you're asking them to do it, that's really disrespectful of their time. But if you go, I tried doing this and I had this little thought about this and I want to make sure it's safe, or what might happen if I do this. The number of times we were early in the company and I would reach out to people that were, you know, material scientists or microbiologists, or, you know, and you would go to them with a curiosity. People that are, you know, when I was in Edinburgh at uni, I was contacting the head of like, multi-sensory perception at Oxford, so forthcoming with his time, and would be like, wow, that's great. You're thinking on this. Here's some bits of information that will help you. And have you thought about this? Incredible steer, wonderful bit of insight. And it's like, those are the sentiments that I think people need to think more on. People do want to help.
And that what's so interesting is in this moment, and not that you're helping me, this is collaborative, but you and your team were so willing to talk to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, you're a busy guy. We both have stuff going on. But the fact that you, absolutely, once that's the general thing that's like, well, everybody, But I think that I look forward to giving my time to those who ask.
Yes.
That's where I'm at now. Is that kind of
absolutely?
It's almost like mentorship,
Yeah, and I've I suppose that's something that the mentorship thing is almost like a parallel point, because I think what we've tried to do for the team is very much this kind of incubation approach. I love that it's crystallized a lot of the way the thinking is. I really enjoy that. But it's also kind of from an industry, I almost see it as a responsibility. If we're saying that we're trying to push these like the boundaries of where food and drink can operate, we have a responsibility to share that information, to help other people to be able to explore those fringes and not have to just go through the same steps to be able to carve out their little space. But I think on the mentorship side, there's a different responsibility. And this is something that I, as a human who's woefully disorganized and is very thankful to have very structured people that kind of like balance out skill sets, and we can work together to create harmony, rather than it being everybody in a similar kind of like mental state that I am in. But when it comes to kind of like that, mentorship aspect of it, like it's a very different responsibility, and it's something that I've noticed. If you look at Alex, Ian, James, like all of the people that have been kind of like key players in our teams, they're excellent teachers. And I think that's a different, you start to notice how much of a specific skill set that is. Yeah. And, I think across all societies, I think teachers have been devalued in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But, I think mentorship is a great way of being able to kind of like really channel and shape your way through an industry. But it's also something that's a very like, it needs to be a very thought out relationship from both sides, from the mentee and from the mentor. And like, I think it's something I've been very wary of late, is going, how do I make sure that any relationship that I particularly enter into, I can do justice to that, rather than just kind of being like, I can be a mentor and I can do these things, because I know that that's not my forte, and I want to be very conscious about not wasting anybody's time.
Right. The team, because I think it's a culture of the Lyan team. Is that the right way to call it, the Lyan team? That's fine, right? Open-mindedness, not judgment. And I was reading about you mentioned that your parents is maybe the model of where you got that openness from. Do you remember being younger and being introduced to massive cultures and different languages, you know what I mean? Like there's the larger than life, because that worldliness, I think, is what maybe makes us less judgmental. You know?
I mean, I think it definitely did come from my parents. It came from my sister. I think, I think I've often tried to reflect on this, and I think even when we were talking about waste, I mean, I think I approached that from a biological point of view, and I was like, after studying this, it just doesn't make sense. But I think also it was seeded in earlier from Buddhist parents who were very open-minded. They were very flexible with us. They tried to expose us to as much as that they could. We were really encouraged to not bracket ourselves. And I think that was, and also as being like immigrants, I think they thought differently on coming into a new place and trying to kind of assimilate, but also kind of, I suppose, respect their background and that balance it's got to be super tough for so many people. Yeah. But I think that did also steer that idea of that outlook of going, let's not pretend that we know everything. Yeah. Let's remain open to stuff. Let's make sure that I think, I talk a lot about a sense of bias and, what do we, I suppose, blinker ourselves to. And I think a big part of the company culture is to be like aware of that and realize that there are different perspectives, there are a lot of things that other people don't care about, even if we do a lot.
Right.
So we need to be conscious of those things and respectful of it, and not just feel our perspective is right. And I suppose that's the kind of crux of it. We've never thought that we were right on anything, or that it was the only way, or we'd solve the problem. It was about demonstrating and highlighting a different way of doing things, and hopefully that being an encouragement for everybody to think wider on stuff. Not ever, I think when we opened White Lyan, a lot of people thought it was because we were being arrogant and telling people that they were doing it wrong. And that was not at all the motivation. We wanted to show there was a wider way of doing things. There was alternatives.
Right.
And, I think for the people that still remain to this day, like horrified by the idea of White Lyan, I think it's because they still see it as an affront to them. They still see it as something that we're saying what they do is wrong. Yeah. And that was never part of it.
Yeah, that's not the... They're on the defense.
Totally.
For no particular reason.
Yeah.
And speaking of White Lyan, when I first met Ian there, I'd never had seen an experience like that reimagined. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it still blows me away, and I still have a few pictures of my trip to go visit. And it was something that then changed the way that I thought about hospitality and the way that I thought about rooms. Like,
wow.
Yeah, it just blew my mind. And so as an artist yourself, I want to talk about the art piece, but has there ever been a piece that you saw that really blew the doors open, so to speak, to empower you to create differently or to think differently?
I mean, I think there's been a couple. There's definitely, you think on those moments in your, like, particularly in your youth when you hear a piece of music and it changes perception.
Yeah.
And you live in it for a period of time. Oh. But like, I also think there's one that's quite powerful to me, because I remember being a young art student and I was still at school, and we did a trip to Madrid, and I remember walking to a room and seeing Picasso's Guernica in there. And I kind of, you're in Spain, I knew that we were going to see kind of Picasso works, and I'd seen Guernica in a book, but the way that it was curated and you walked in, I was not expecting it to just appear. And the scale of it is also quite disarming. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, and this has happened several times, like, it often happens when you've formed an opinion in your head.
Right.
And, certain countries I've visited, you have a preconception about what it might be, or you have prejudices around, like, what is going to be the experience.
Right.
And I remember the first time I ever went and saw a theatre show, I was like, what's going to happen? It's a stage, how's this going to feel exciting and be mesmerized by human beings being able to be there? But Guernica totally sideswiped me. And I remember just staring at it. And, of course, there's a lot of kind of like powerful imagery, and what it represents is quite an intense topic.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's the point of it, but I didn't expect it to do that. And I remember being very aware of, I must have been 14 or 15. Mm-hmm. So it's not like I was like very young, and it wasn't like I was like, fully formed in my thinking either, right. But it jolted so much self-awareness in myself about how little I understood about myself.
Oh, wow.
To be able to be in the presence of something like that, to take in the beauty, to take in all of the imagery, the allegory of what it's trying to represent, mm-hmm. but also then to realize that, you think yourself, you think the way that you navigate the world and all those things,
right.
And then to have that, like, well, really just shifted in yourself is quite a strange experience. And it sticks out to me from that, because it remains like a humbling point that I can go back to.
Which is why I bring up White Lyan. I wasn't involved with any of the experience, but I get to consume it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that was the thing that was just, it was revelatory for me.
Yeah.
It's like, it can be done like this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's that same thing. Art is art.
Sure.
It can be music, to your point.
Yep.
It can be obviously paintings. It can be movies, any of that stuff.
Absolutely.
And for whatever reason, I stepped away from that experience there, loving life more. And it encouraged me to be more innovative in how I think. And so it moved me, much like that piece moved you. And I think that, in a way, that's never your goal, right? To create awe-inspiring or awesome things, right?
Oh, no,
Probably not.
It's been a week of hearing some lovely, bits about what some of our spaces have meant emotionally to people over the last week of our decade celebrations. But hearing that, it's very wonderful to hear that. That's very touching, and I appreciate you telling me that story a lot. But no, it's not that we're certainly not trying to, yes, we care about what we're doing, and we definitely feel like it's important in the way that you should in any of your creative outputs, but it wasn't, I wouldn't have expected, that's not the aim of it. It wasn't to go, we want people to feel the gravity of all of these things. But it was, of course, you want it to touch people emotionally. And the wonderful thing about creation is you never know what that resonance is going to be.
That's right, yeah.
And, it can be that, it could be about, Guernica is about war, and you want people to realize all those things. But actually, the impact of it might be completely unrelated to that.
That's
it could
right,
be
yeah.
complete. And same with, as you say about White Lyan, it was meant to kind of challenge the role of a bartender's space, how you interacted, what did it mean to break down some of the barriers around hospitality, but then to also get people to think on the idea of innovation, or to feel that it could be done differently is amazing to hear.
It's so crazy because talking about the compulsivity, at least that I have of creating things, and in my case it's music, and I'm shifted to writing now. And
yeah, amazing.
Pop, 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 right? Like but I do wonder, and I ask you this question because often I ask questions of people that I respect because I'm trying to get an answer for myself as well.
I think that's a process. That's what conversation is.
That's healthy, right? That's like a natural thing. The ideas have been so crisp and so resounding from the team over the years. Do you ever think you're not going to be able to write a hit again? Does that ever occur to you?
I think there's always a sense of worry about, and it's not about the creative process, it's about, is it spreading too thin? Are you giving enough time? Are you giving enough care to make sure that you're putting the right output out there?
Yeah.
But I never worry about exhaustion of ideas, because I think as long as you're staying open to stimulus, and I think the research that we do, the people that we converse with, the places that we go, and the fact that we always remain on we're always trying to learn, and because that's the shared perspective of the team, I don't feel worried that we're ever going to run out of ideas.
It's the infinite well.
Absolutely.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Life is finite in our time.
Yeah.
So you could fill it up with as much stuff and still not fill it all. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have tried to understand what inspires me. Conversations certainly inspire me. These interviews always inspire me. But if you're looking to perhaps break away and go to a place where you can create or you can ideate, are there mechanisms that you have for that? Like, are there places like go into the mountains or whatnot?
Yeah. Well, I think there's the classic one that a lot of people do, where they talk about, the moment they get into bed and they have that clarity of thought, and shower is quite a universal one for people, and I definitely have those as well. There's certainly been bits where it's allowed, I suppose, you to cut out a lot of the other noise, and so your brain can just do a natural the white noise of a shower is also something I think is quite useful.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think some of the bits where I come back most invigorated is when I'm around, and it's not just our teams. I love walking into any of our spaces, and I feel the energy of the teams, and it just kind of like it spurs you on. And if I go into the studio office and like all the bits that they're working on, it reinvigorates. But I get that feeling. I mean, when Ian and I were first doing the development for White Lyan and some of the first projects, we used to go into my sister's office, and her company was an innovation company, so of course there was lots of creative things going on. But it was just the buzz of human energy. Yeah, like is very energizing. I know I've repeated that word in there, but I think it's like, it is something that you feed off, even if it's unrelated to the task you're trying to solve. So I think being around anything that feels like a hive of passion and activity, and I think this is the reason why I say, you could go to a conversation. If you're speaking with anybody and they're passionate, it could be a topic that you would never have cared about. Yeah. It feels invigorating.
Yes.
And, it's a clear thing to the team. It's like, we should want to learn from anybody. If anybody is doing something interesting, if they're a leader in whatever they're doing, we should want to learn from them, even if it's completely unrelated to any of the tasks that we would do. Because not only can that shift your perspective, and one little sentence might resonate, and all those things that we talked about before about you never know what the emotional response is, but it's also just that energy aspect. When you're around things that feel alive, and
Vibrant,
that's the reason
electric,
why nature is important for this as well. Like I love the fact that there are therapies being developed where it's like, go spend time in nature, because that's also very rejuvenative and kind of stimulating. But the fact that if you can be around that kind of like energy, it's a magical thing. So I think that's probably kind of one of the key places that we kind of maintain, and I suppose sometimes consciously, but often or not, we just it happens in amongst the way that we work. You end up kind of like in these like very interesting circles. That's a powerful point for creation.
Do you, with such a plethora of work under your belt, we'll say that, and team, I'm credit everybody, everybody involved. Is a legacy something that's important to you? Leaving a legacy? Because that's somewhat tied to ego, which is, I don't think that's a problem. If the legacy is Ryan was a good dude, that's a pretty good legacy.
Totally. and I think that's probably more, I think, where like it does like, that feels much more interesting to me than like seeing your name up on a wall forevermore or anything like that. Like, the idea that it kind of like inspired like these were good people doing good things.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of been the tagline of the company, is good things. And, if that endures, that feels really nice because, we want to see purposeful, positive change in the world. Like, yes, we're ultimately making drinks, but any creative output, you want there to be like that emotional connection for people. And that should not just be like a warm, fuzzy feeling. That should kind of translate on and get like passed on as it goes to the world.
Right.
So if we can introduce more positivity, and that's the way that people view us, and that becomes something that endures, that feels like we've done good. It feels like we've succeeded in something that is beyond just like that moment that we created it for. It's got more of a long-term impact. That would be something that I see as a valuable legacy.
I think I'm with you. I think for me, I just want people to say, I wish I had got a drink with it. Yeah, it's like the ultimate litmus for me for some
100%.
reason. Through all of the troubleshooting and all of these innovative sessions you've had with the team, how many of the ideas hit the cutting room floor? Would you say more that make it to the movie or less, or is it a kind of an even?
You know what? It's probably 60-40. That 60% makes it through. 40% gets cold. And I make a joke each time we do a new like menu launch that we should do a B-sides one. Because sometimes it's, none of it's ever wasted, because even if you go through the thought process and then for whatever reason, it's just like, that is not a goer.
Right.
You've learned so much through that process. But often we'll still develop things. It just doesn't fit for whatever reason. It might, even if you're getting as granular as like the styles of drink that you want on a menu, and you're like, we've got too many of this style, we don't need that other one, even though it's great. Like, it's nice to have been able to kind of go through that, but it's also sometimes feels a shame to have things that were solid and would have made it in other ways, but for whatever tiny little detail at the end, it didn't quite kind of translate through. But I also kind of like that we've had that kind of body of like work.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
B-sides is a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Because it's still worthy
Totally.
Of its time and place, but what is that time and place?
Yeah. I always think as well, like just to kind of carry on the B-sides analogy, it's like, and I don't know if this is that thing where you're like, you're really into a band and you're like, but it was this B-side that I really loved. Whether it's just because it's not as like big as the main hits, or because the B-sides were, you kind of couldn't connect to them if you hadn't gone through the journey of the main album.
It's a great point, yeah.
And so, like, with some of these things, I do love the fact that, and, people talk about, like, they chat to the team, and yes, they tried some of the drinks, but then they give them something else to try. And, that's the bit that, like, and it might be because they feel like they're getting something special that's off menu or any of those things. Or it might be because, to kind of like the B-side thing, you've understood the menu, you've gone on that journey, you're bought into it. And so when you're presented something that would have been a bit weird by itself and probably wouldn't have been a main menu cocktail, but you can appreciate a totally different side of it as a result of that. So yeah, maybe we will. Which is
I
like
love
a
that.
B-side menu
Oh
that
man,
we
that's
keep
so
back.
yeah. They're fans.
Yeah,
You know what I
totally.
mean? And so they'll bear stuff could get dark and weird and droney, but people will still follow you on tour. I mean, you keep using that analogy. I've got a couple questions left for you. One is there a flavor? I don't know if anyone's ever asked you this, but it just kind of occurred to me. Is there a flavor not a profile, an actual specific flavor that you really don't like?
I don't like metallic flavors.
Oh.
So because I'm a total wuss when it comes to chili. I have just a very low
No
tolerance.
way, really?
Yeah. Like comically low.
Okay.
But that's not because I don't appreciate the flavor. I just can't handle it. Metallic flavors to me just really jar. And I suppose the one where it manifests the most is oysters. So I love shellfish, but oysters to me, like all I can taste is like a big whack of sea and metal.
Oh wow!
And so I really struggle with that as a profile, and so much so that there's things like oyster leaf that aren't in any way related, but they have that kind of like metallic green note to it.
Really?
And even some seaweeds I struggle with that in that way. So that's probably the only one where I really don't enjoy it as a flavor.
I like that though. No, I mean because everybody always is like, "What's your favorite drink?" It's like, no, don't ask me that. What's your least favorite drink? All right, now I can tell you that.
Yeah.
It's not even being negative, but to know what you really want out of life and things, you have to know what you don't want.
I couldn't agree more. It's actually, to me, often when I'm chatting, again, trainings with the team, but also to friends who aren't part of the trade, I'm like, it's much easier to say what you don't like than to be like, oh, I really like this. And like, that, partly because you want to step out your comfort zone. You should be, if you're in a setting where you've got a professional looking after you, buy into what they want to give you. That's the nicest way to be able to experience it. But if you know you really dislike something, if you hate anise, flag that, and that's the better goalpost to be able to have than the, I usually drink a XYZ.
And if you meet a woman who gets really, really angry when they're drunk, don't like that. So there you go. You can move on and kind of go to the other direction. So all right, 2 questions left. This one I ask every guest, but I'm going to make it a little more pointed for you. So you're anywhere in the world, doesn't matter, you're drinking a fine cocktail that you and the team has crafted, and you could have a conversation / drink with any artist, living or deceased. Who might you like to have a conversation and a drink with?
I would have loved to have a drink with David Bowie.
Oh.
Partly because, there was, again, like formative years, particularly the kind of like Ziggy Stardust era. It was just like it landed a point for whatever else was going on in my life that it felt so like powerful to me. But also, I think just the idea of not letting success boundary your desire to innovate. And, it's very difficult sometimes. And I think we've been really fortunate that we've never made the business about money. So it's like, it's never come up as a barrier when we've been doing things. But a lot of people asked, when we were closing successful bars, they were like, is that like, does that make sense to do? And to me, it was the most logical thing to do. And, it's always surprised me how much that still felt very strange to people. And I think to speak with somebody like Bowie, who, really would have been at the height of like a certain part of a sound or a character or an album, the fame of that, to switch and kind of do something completely different. And, there's other artists that have done this to great success. But I think in a period where, he also challenged, what does sexuality mean?
Right,
what does
it look like?
What does it look like?
Yeah.
What, who are the people that I interact with? Where do I go for these things? There was a real lack of fear. And I think that's, fear is obviously it's a difficult thing to understand, let alone control. But to be able to be faced in a very different world in a very different time and to still come across as fearless and to push that side of innovation, that's a great drink conversation.
It is.
And, I think he also had a great sense of humor around things as well. So it's not going to be a dry academic thing. It's also going to be, there's going to be humor, there's going to be heartbreak. It's going to be all those things that are wonderful to be able to have when you're, a martini with David Bowie would have just been brilliant.
Get out.
Yeah.
Be really amazing. Well, you mentioned fear. This was going to be my last question. Are you ever afraid of failing?
100%. But, and I think fear is healthy. I think it like helps hone and kind of helps you set things up right. But I don't have a fear of failing. I don't. That's not where my ego is sensitive. I have a fear tied to a responsibility that I'm very conscious that we are a business that has kind of been quite dynamic and we've shifted in quite a footloose way. And it could seem like we're very flippant with the fact that there are lots, there's close to 100 people in the team who, their livelihoods are tied to this. And it's not fair to always like, and we're not flippant. It's not that we don't do things with consideration. So it's not like we're gambling each time that we do something new and, we're throwing their livelihoods on the line. But it is something that I think on a lot is each time we make these decisions, are we being conscious of all the people it affects? And are we giving it the right amount of care, or is it because we have a feeling? And I believe in gut feelings. A lot of the things that we've done is because we've noticed something that's happened in the world and we feel like we can reflect something to it.
Yeah.
But it needs to not dismiss the fact that, there's people as part of that. And they've given their time and they've put their part of their career into this. And, some people have been with us for huge amounts of time. How do we make sure that we're being respectful of that and we're setting them up for success rather than like gambling failure?
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. I couldn't imagine a better like half dimly lit room to sit here and talk about life with you. Really, I'm so glad I reached out because this has just been a pleasure to chat with you about life.
Couldn't agree more. Like it's, these are the kind of conversations, as you say, it's, it feels just more like a lovely dialogue.
That's
like,
right, yeah.
And, I think whenever you get into these kind of conversations, even if it's something inherent to yourself, you learn something new when you put it out into the world. And so the idea of like discussing these things and caring about it and being able to have these types of conversation is, I find it really meaningful and I'm very grateful for it.
No, same. And I hope we keep in touch. It's
100%.
I love London and I can't believe I did this interview without sleep for like over a day. So
oh man, hats off to you.
I could like see the words kind of falling. It's like, oh shit, it was there and then it just like fell to the bottom of my mind. But it all worked out. Ryan, thanks so much for chatting. Hopefully we'll talk soon.
Absolute pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Well, there we have it. Ryan, Mr. Lyan from White Lyan, Dandelion, Lyaness, and so much more. Really great getting to talk about life, philosophy, creativity, his team, the culture. To me, the bars that I've been to, I'm not special. I've traveled around quite a bit, and I've seen many, many cocktail bars throughout the world, but something about the Lyan concepts to me, they ring louder and they ring more innovatively than any other places I've ever been to in my life. Seed Library included, which is there in Shoreditch, which I visited in the trip as well. The service is great. It's never over-imposing. The cocktails are never too smart for their own good. Now, the process to make some of the ingredients might be a little ornate at times, but the drinks themselves are so accessible, so beautiful, and so balanced. It's about balance. And the last bit about that, Ryan, something I'd like to commend you on is you and your team perfectly balance execution with the service itself. It's always a pleasure to go to one of your bars and see the team work. So thanks everybody for listening to Show to V with Mike G. I've got some more interviews coming up from this Scotland trip, including the founder of Kilchoman and the founder of Port of Leith Distillery. It was quite a trip. So no matter how many more episodes of Tales from the Crypt you want to watch, just clear out spooky season, or if you're thinking, man, I think my Halloween costume's pretty good, we'll see what everybody says tomorrow. Please keep dancing.